Hi, and welcome to the second part of the Cycle of Stress video series, a two-part series. So if you remember from the first one, if you haven't watched the Cycle of Stress, then go back and watch that first, because it's an important part of this one. So this is the video on getting off. Oops. The cycle of stress. So this is how you get out. So ultimately you've got your blow up, you've got your make up, and you've got your build up. If you want to get off, what you have to do is grow up. Right? If you've watched the Big Eye, Little Eye, or the Resource Self and the Unresourced Self videos, you'll know that we've got a bunch of little eyes of strategies that we pulled forward from our childhood. And that we've never really adjusted for our adult life. We've never gone back and taken a look at them and said, hey, you know what, this isn't helping, this isn't working, this isn't building relationships, this isn't helping me live by my values. And so we keep living them, and that's what keeps us in our cycle of stress. So in order to get off the cycle of stress, we actually need to grow up our little eyes, we need to grow up our strategies, and we need to grow up our capacity to engage in relationships in a good way. And so ultimately, the kind of the grow up process begins here. Now, in the previous video, you'll see we were making promises that we eventually know we have no intention of keeping, or have no way of keeping. We apologize but don't mean it, and we are on our best behavior, but we keep believing bad things about the other person. And so in order to get off the cycle of stress, we actually need to stop that. We need to make promises that we can keep. So we're not promising to stop drinking, we're promising to join AA. We're not promising to never yell again. We're going to promise to take a break before we get loud, right? So things like, promising, I'm going to try to take a time out, you help me remember that if I forget, right? Those sorts of things are promises, little actionables that we can do along the way that allow us to manage these activating events and actually help us tie them off, right? Just think about life, right? We're not going to have a life without activating events. They're everywhere. We can reduce the number of activating events we experience by having positive self-talk. We can reduce activating events by changing our beliefs about them, about the world, and essentially taking our buttons and covering them or removing them entirely, right? People can't push buttons we don't have anymore. People can't push buttons that we've protected and covered and kind of put a lid on. Right? We'd actually have to take the lid off for them to hit it, right? So the idea here is that we actually, in order to grow up, in order to get out of this cycle of stress, we need to begin to resolve these issues, these activating events, as they happen, while also changing the way we engage in the world so that there's actually fewer of them, right? If we change our belief about how the home ought to run, for example, like, if you think that when you come home, dinner should be ready, the house should be clean, the kids should be all in a good mood and with homework done, right? Obviously not a belief system that's going to work, at least not in my household, probably most others. So the reality is, if we change our beliefs that we can expect to come home to a bit of chaos, a bit of unfinished business, and know that, maybe we can make dinner today, or maybe we can do the homework with the kids, or if we're the one at home, recognizing that, the person coming in the door may be carrying a lot of stress the day, and we can make room for that and allow them to kind of arrive and land in a way that they feel respected and cared for, and then they can engage in the day. But by doing all of those, by actually seeing what's going on and problem solving for them, what eventually happens is we get out of this cycle altogether. Because what happens is we simply don't have any buildup anymore. And that's the key. Removing the buildup, either just managing stress. And the way we manage stress is by managing our beliefs, by managing our emotions, by managing our expectations of other people, and by managing the activating events as they happen. So when we're in a problem-solving mode, when we're able to reduce the amount of stress, we will reduce the amount of blow-ups that happen or freeze-outs that happen, right? And really, what is the kind of the bar here? Because most people think, oh, geez, yeah, like I'm never going to be that perfect, right? As if I'm going to always be cool. I'm never going to, have any of these behaviors. Well, what we're looking for is a reduced frequency. So this is how you know when you're starting to grow up. This is how you know when you're actually able to solve these problems as they happen and put them to bed, is the frequency of the stress behaviors will go down. Also, the intensity. You will see a reduced intensity of them, right? So if you don't have nearly as many of these in your system when you get to your stress behavior, whatever you do in crisis, then it's going to be less of a crisis. It's going to be less intense, right? And if you see that happening, if you see the frequency of stress behaviors in your home, in your life going down, if you see a reduction in intensity of that stress and that stress behavior, you are working in the right direction, and you can be encouraged. This is a lifelong journey. So an example, dishes. In our home, we've got 6 people that live there. 3 of them love to cook and bake. So there are always tons of dishes. There are big dishes, there are small dishes, there are baking dishes, there are dinner dishes, all those sorts of things. Fry pan, we like cooking with oil, so there's mess everywhere. So basically, dishes are a thing in our home. And for about probably a decade, we had a solution that managed that. Right? We had, a month on, a month off, and the child that's doing the dishes gets to sit in the front of the car, which was, a really big honor, very motivating, go figure, but it was a big deal. And so the kids were happy to do the dishes, well, not happy, but they were okay with doing the dishes when it was their turn. And when they turned 18, the younger child, kind of behind the child, so we have 4 kids, right? So 18 ages out, the next one picks it up, right? And then that happens for a few years, and then that one ages out, and the last one picks it up. And now we're at the point where the 3rd child is aged out, and there's nobody to pick it up behind. Guess what? Solution stopped working. Guess what? Stress. Because it was an activating event. How do we manage this? What story can that 18-year-old youth now tell that makes it okay for them to do the dishes when everybody else got to stop at 18? So that's the negotiation that's been going on in our home for, since last September. And so we've been working it through, we've been figuring it out, we've been slightly less happy than we were before. However, because we're working at this, it's a complicated problem apparently. We're working at it. And so the stress behaviors associated with the dishes are not happening nearly as often as they were initially, because we figured out a way through. And that's the key, is how do we get to this point, right? So we're going to have things like compassion, right? We are going to have things like kindness. We're going to have positive self-talk. We're going to get help. Right? We might talk to other family members. We might talk to other families. How did you do it? How did you manage this? Some of the more serious issues like addictions or significant abusive behavior or things that are hard to get out of, we need professional help. And so we need to go out and pay counselors, maybe a life coach, maybe a mentor, maybe a pastor or a faith leader, somebody who is able to teach us and hold us accountable. Because it's up to us to grow up. It's not up to the other person to grow up. We can only manage ourselves. We can only control ourselves. And so we need to be responsible for ourselves and grow ourselves up. And the reality is if we change, everything changes. If I change how I do things in the whole home shifts, because I'm an important part of that ecosystem. And so we need to recognize our role in the build-up and begin to problem solve effectively. Now, obviously, it's difficult to problem solve with people who refuse to, or people who are stuck in negative behaviors and negative self-talk and all those sorts of things. However, things change when we change, and we need to remember that we can only be responsible for ourselves. So this is not for you to go, oh, hey, you, look, you got to grow up. No, think about yourself. When we pause this video, ask yourself, what promises could I keep? Not promises I should keep, because should is just a whole pile of junk that has nothing to do with reality. What promises could I keep? What can I actually do to stay true to my word? When you start doing that, you begin to reduce the stress. When you begin to reduce the stress, you reduce the frequency and intensity of the stress. And the way to do that is to live by our values. Remember, we need to have compassion. We need to change, right? Change our strategy. Because if we don't become something new, nothing new will happen in our lives. And so it's up to us to begin to kind of move how we are in the world, what we talk to ourselves about, how much support do we get, because a resourced person will be a supported person. I have lots of people that I can call on to get help. I'm a fairly resourced person, and there are times where I get overwhelmed and I need help. And so those are the people that help me change, improve my self-talk, be compassionate and kind. All of these things speak into getting off of this cycle. We want to get out of this cycle because it sucks. It really, really sucks. And so getting off the cycle of stress is about managing stress. It's about self-care. And if we're doing self-care, we're also being compassionate and kind to ourselves. We're solving the problems as they come up as best we can, because then they don't contribute to these extreme stress behaviors, these things that we do that harm ourselves and others. So I hope you found this helpful. And again, feel free to pause the video when we get to the final frame and just think about, what would it be like for you to keep a promise? What could you keep as a promise? And what are the activating events that you could begin to actually deal with so that they're solved, so they stop creating stress in your life? Resolving those stresses will resolve the frequency and intensity and will allow you to grow up your little eyes and become the more resourced adult you need to be to get off this cycle. Thanks for watching. Again, look forward to any comments or feedback, and have a great day.